All right. Hello. Welcome to the April 19th online hangout for engineering ethics. We're in week 13. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence and autonomy today, the autonomy of robots. Let's go ahead and jump into the lesson. Yeah, so we're in lesson 13. Remember, there's only 15 lessons in the semester, and lesson 15 is just what did you learn? So really lessons 13 and 14 are our final two lessons. This lesson we'll be talking about machine autonomy, especially in weapons and in civilian drone cases. And I'll talk a little bit about ethics with respect to robots. And then next time we'll talk about technological unemployment and the impact that robotics and automation is having on the economy generally. And that's the final two lessons. I will say, I'll put it back on me. I am a little bit behind on grading. I believe lesson 11 still hasn't been graded. We're on lesson 13 now, so that means lesson 11s and 12s for most of you haven't been graded. I hope to catch up this week. Most of the assignments, well, I hope to catch up on the grading this week. You should be able to have a pretty good sense, since the assignments that are left are normal assignments that are like the other assignments we've had all semester. You should have a pretty good sense of where you stand in the course and the amount of work we have left to do to make sure that you can get the grade that you want to get in the time that we have left. Remember, there's still a extra credit assignment in week 11 if you want to finish that assignment. There's also a talk this week on Deepwater Horizon. Let me go ahead and show this to you. So there's a talk this week. Everyone probably got this email recently on the Gulf Coast. So someone's giving a talk. Apparently there's people who are familiar with the Gulf Coast disaster, and they'll be giving a talk on campus this Friday on April 22nd from 11:30 to 1 p.m. at the Campus Ballroom Center A. If you want to go to this, I encourage your attendance. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it to this, but I encourage your attendance. If you do go to this event and do a little write-up, post it in the forums for this week, lesson 13. You can post it in the open thread if you want, or you can post it in its own thread. But if you go to this event and do a write-up for the rest of the discussion boards, and by write-up I mean a little one-page post of normal length, 350 words or so, to explain, what the speakers talked about, what we have learned, if we are safer. If you can answer these questions for us, what have we learned? Are we safer? Where are the impacts over? It'd be interesting to find out from some experts what's going on with the oil spill today. Since we spent so much time talking about it in the course, it'd be nice to have some insight on some updates. So if anyone can go to this event, I would appreciate seeing some extra credit, and I will give extra credit to anyone who submits a write-up on that event. So if you submit a write-up, I will give you extra credit. I will give you 20 points of extra credit, the same as the other extra credit assignment. So hopefully that makes it worth your while to go to this event. I'd be interested to see if anyone learns anything interesting. Other than that, lesson 13 and 14, you have posts and replies and quizzes for lesson 13 and 14. There is no replies and no quizzes for lesson 15. That's just your final post. And then we're done. If you have any questions, if you have any questions about your grades, if you think if I've made some mistake in your grades from previous lessons, send me an email, let me know. I have a backlog of emails that I'm getting through, and I'm working through them. Thank you for your patience. Yeah, Mina asks in the chat, there's 2 extra credit assignments now. That's correct. There's 1 extra credit assignment to watch that documentary in lesson 11. There's another extra credit assignment if you go to this Deepwater Horizon oil spill talk. The extra credit in lesson 11, you posted in lesson 11. There's a thread in lesson 11 called extra credit. It says extra credit thread. Lesson 11, I'll pull it up. And you want to post your extra credit assignment in lesson 11 in that thread. In this case, I haven't actually graded all these. Yeah, see, so this thread right here, everything is remix. If you go to this thread, there's a documentary that I ask you watch, and then I want you to just write a little reflection piece on the assignment for 20 points extra credit. This is due on the final day of class. You'll also get 20 points extra credit if you post a similar thing in lesson 13 on the BP oil spill from going to this talk on Friday. You won't get the extra credit for just talking about the BP oil spill. You'll get extra credit if you actually go to the talk and demonstrate that you actually saw what these people said. Do you have to go there? It's not a required assignment. Here I'll ask if you're required to assign this event. No, to attend this event. No, it's not a requirement. It's just extra credit. Can you post extra credit without going there? No. The extra credit is for attending this event and commenting on what happened. Yeah, I mean, if you can't make, so there's a lot of people saying they can't make the event, then you can't get the extra credit, sorry. How do you prove that you actually attended? You prove it by talking about what the speakers discussed and answering the questions as the speaker answered them. I will be able to tell from what you wrote if you actually went to the event or not. Make it clear in your presentation, in your write-up, that you actually went to the event. I may show up at the end of the event, maybe during the question and answers, so I might see you there. All right, good. If there's any other questions, go ahead and just interrupt me. I will push on to the lesson now. All right, so lesson 13, we're talking about the autonomy of machines. Autonomy, we saw last time, is a bit of a controversial issue, whether or not machines can be autonomous at all. In fact, a lot of people think that machines can't be autonomous, the machines just aren't the right kind of things to demonstrate autonomy. You have to be intelligent, or you have to be alive. You have to have a brain like ours to be intelligent, a lot of people think. In which case they deny that machines can be autonomous, and sort of the worry doesn't really come up. And we saw also last time that Turing, the people who do believe that artificial intelligence is a real thing that we need to be concerned about, like Alan Turing, they also think that it's not merely a matter of being intelligent like us that makes artificial intelligence a relevant issue for us to talk about. Even if these machines aren't thinking anything like us, they still represent an issue. So just for context, you should know that this statistic is a little bit out of date. This is from 2013, but currently over 50%, 61.5% of web traffic is non-human. This is from The Atlantic. Most internet traffic is not humans talking to humans. It's not you sending a message to someone else. Most internet traffic is machines talking to machines. Right? Establishing protocols and acknowledging that messages were sent and so on. But most of the traffic is not human traffic. It's not human-generated traffic generated from human interactions. But it's traffic generated entirely by machines talking to each other. Maybe that's not surprising. Maybe another thing to mention here then is how advanced social robots have actually gotten on the internet. This is a MIT tech review that I linked to, Successful Social Robots on Twitter. I linked to it at the lecture. And it talks about a research team that created 120 different social bots, all with slightly different profiles, with different genders, that were active at certain times of the day rather than others. And they set them loose on Twitter to see how well they did. Of the 120 bots that they sent out there, 38, by the time the experiment was over, 38 of those bots were suspended, which means that 69% of these robots escaped detection and interacted on the Twitter network as if they were another human being. No one recognized that they were an AI. Over this time period, they got something like 5,000 followers from almost 2,000 different users. More than 20 of them picked up more than 100 followers, which is more than most humans have on Twitter. Most humans have about 50 followers on Twitter. So these robots are not only invading our social spaces and passing undetected, but they're doing it better than we are. In fact, they're becoming more popular than we are. Right? So robots have better social reputations online than their human counterparts. You can mess with this a little bit. It's perhaps not surprising that female gendered robots do better socially online. If you make your robot female gendered, then it tends to attract more followers and retweets and so on. And, recapitulating the same gender biases that already exist in human culture, right? So these artificial intelligence systems are passing for humans, interacting with other humans. All the humans think that they're human. They're buying into the same and reinforcing these same biases like gender stereotypes and so on, reinforcing it. Right, so this isn't changing the circumstances radically. In fact, it's this kind of infiltration. They're sneaking in undetected. In fact, this has become such a problem, the fact that we can't distinguish between humans and machines, that regularly humans in the year 2016, and for really the last few years, regularly humans have to prove that they're human. In other words, they have to pass a kind of reverse Turing test, where they establish to the machine that in fact that they're human. So most of you have been on websites where you have to solve these little CAPTCHAs. The CAPTCHA is a completely automated public Turing test to tell humans and computers apart, computers and humans apart. And the idea is that it's supposed to determine whether you're a computer or a human. If you can write this word, this kind of visual recognition is difficult for machines, or at least it's difficult for machines to do easily. You can get a sophisticated machine learning software to solve this kind of problem, but it's hard, and spammers who are looking to cheat the system aren't running this kind of sophisticated software. So this kind of reCAPTCHA system tends to block out the cheat machines and let in the human beings. And regularly, human beings interacting online have to prove their identity as humans using these kinds of systems. Right? So even if machines aren't already as intelligent as humans, we're already facing a situation where they are representing social challenges. They're disrupting human social networks in certain ways. They're reinforcing human social networks in other ways. So artificial intelligence is a human social problem, social issue. Maybe not a problem. Maybe problem is too strong of a word. Okay, so social media, artificial intelligence is an issue. It's an ethical issue. In the last lesson, lesson 11, I had this reading from Peter Asaro hidden in the optional readings. Peter Asaro is one of my friends. He works at the New School. He's affiliated with the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots because in the year 2016, we actually need a group called the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots who are around petitioning to stop killer robots. They've been, just this last week, they were in, I want to say Amsterdam. They were in Europe somewhere presenting to a UN convention on conventional weapons. This is the UN conventions where they typically discuss new weapon systems, whether they should be banned or should be regulated, whether there should be sanctions against the use of these kinds of weapons. And at this most recent meeting, the UN had a big panel of experts to talk about autonomous weapon systems and the dangers involved. Before we get into autonomous weapon systems, so I want to just really briefly go over some things from Peter's article here. So the article is about what should we want from a robot ethic. And I just want to make clear this thing that he talks about right off the bat. What do we mean by robot ethics? And Peter says there's three things we might mean by robot ethics. He says we might think about how humans act ethically through or with robots. In this case, the humans are the ethical agents. Then he says we also might think about how to design robots to act ethically, or about whether robots could actually be ethical agents. And then here the robots are the subjects in question. And then finally, there's this relationship between humans and robots, right? How should we treat robots? How should robots treat us? Right? Are they owed anything from an ethical standpoint? Do we have duties to robots? Do robots have rights? So questions like, do robots have rights, can strike people as kind of out there, outlandish maybe. So I just want to emphasize this one more time. Let me show this. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I just want to emphasize these three different ways of dealing with robot ethics, and these are all tackling different aspects of the relationship between humans and robots, right? So Peter Starr says three different things we might mean by robot ethics. First, how humans act ethically through robots. So in other words, what are humans trying to do, and how are we using robots to do it? So we've already seen a little bit of robots when we saw the Deepwater Horizon oil spill being dealt with by robots working underwater, BP couldn't actually put humans a mile under the surface of the ocean. So they had to put robots down there, and those robots are able to do a bunch of things that humans couldn't do otherwise. And it's because we had those robots that we were able to stop the spill as much as we could. Robots have also been working in like the Fukushima nuclear power station meltdown. Robots were in there navigating areas that human beings couldn't go. And in fact, this is usually how humans use robots. The development of autonomous robotic systems have been to replace humans in situations where it might be dangerous, right? So you can't put a human being at the bottom of the ocean or in the middle of a melted down nuclear reactor, right? But you can put a robot there, and the robot can take cameras and other kinds of sensors with it, little actuators to change things. And so humans can act remotely through their robots. One way we saw this show up really early on is with the trolley experiment. Remember that people are willing to pull the lever to save the 5 and kill the 1, but they aren't willing to push the 1 onto the tracks. Right here we have a technologically mediated human interaction where there's a piece of technology in between the humans, and then human beings are fine doing that interaction. But if you take that technological mediation away, then human beings start to feel uncomfortable with these kinds of interactions. Right. So this is a case where humans are acting ethically through their tools, and we can imagine robots as just a more automated version of their tools. Right. So you see the same problem as people get more distant because they're acting through these remote operations. Then the challenge of ethical distance starts to arise. So how can robots act ethically through humans? How can humans design robots to act ethically? Right. So it's not just what do we do with our robots, but how are we designing these robots to maybe do on their own? Right. What are we building these robots to do? And how are the robots behaving in these circumstances? So one thing. So let me pull up. If I can find it really quickly. Sorry, what's going on here? Okay. I almost got it. Sorry, I didn't have these things loaded up earlier. Okay. Let me bring back to. So here's just 2 issues of artificial intelligence about how humans act ethically through their robots. There's been some discussion recently about how our online automated assistants are really bad at giving certain kinds of advice. So for instance, if you're in some kind of crisis, for instance, if you're the victim of a domestic violence case, right, if you're being abused in your relationship, if you ask, what do I do if I'm being abused to Siri or Cortana, they don't really have any advice. It's on your shoulders. Right? There is advice out there about what to do, right? There's all sorts of hotlines and help networks for dealing with abusive relationships, for support for people in abusive relationships, but these systems aren't giving any of that advice, right? They're not being the kinds of first responders that you might expect, right? People ask these kinds of questions to these machines all the time. People talking to their machine about committing suicide or being depressed, about being in a violent relationship or having just been raped, right? And these things are traumatic for the people, and they are looking to these technological resources for support, sometimes because it's hard to get that support elsewhere. But these systems aren't designed with these with these kinds of functions in mind, even though human beings use this technology this way, right? They will ask these kinds of questions. The designers of the technology aren't thinking about these kinds of questions at all, and so the machines end up being completely useless, right, for these systems. So you might think that we have maybe some ethical obligation, because people are going to ask their machines about these kinds of crisis situations. Maybe we have some obligation to build these machines to properly deal with these crises, right? To properly direct people who are being abused, right? To be able to detect when the conversation reflects that someone's being abused, and then to direct them to the right resources of support. Right, so this is supposed to be an example of how we can help build our machines so that we can act ethically through them, right? In this case, even though the person's not talking to another human being, right, they're just talking to their artificial intelligence, we can design these machines to help in those situations as well. One more example about the ethics of how we build these machines. It's the case that most of our artificial intelligence systems, like Siri and Cortana, Amazon's Alexa, that they tend to be gendered female. You can also think about things like, I mean, a lot of the robots that we make are gendered female, but also in the movies that we watch, Her, gendered female, artificial intelligence, lots of the robots that we make in Next Machina, is also gendered female robots. And, right, so there's questions about why is this, and what social forces does it reinforce? Does it more deeply entrench? Right? If there's a gender bias that makes us expect our assistants to be female, right, then building our assistants to be female reinforces that bias, makes it seem inevitable. You might be interested to know, I didn't know this until reading this article, that Siri in England, in the UK, Siri is voiced male by default. You can switch Siri to female, but Siri is voiced male by default. And the explanation is something like that British people are more likely to listen to a male than a female, or find listening to the male easier, something like that. Some demographic research, some consumer research suggested that they should make it male rather than female. Right, but these things aren't neutral choices, right? These are distinct choices, and as we saw earlier, gendering your AI female rather than male can have an impact on how much influence it has over the social environment, social situation. Right, so these issues matter, and they matter for how we design our machines. Right, so this is another kind of ethical question we might raise with respect to robots, how we should design these machines. And then finally, robot rights. At the end of this lecture, hopefully I'll have some time to talk about robot rights. But let me talk about how we build these robots, and in particular, how we build these killer robots. So the debate right now that the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots is engaged in is about killer robots, killbots. Killbots aren't any military robot. So today, commonly deployed with lots of troops are these small tactical robots that are commonly deployed with troops already today, and have been for a while. This is the Talon sword systems. Not all military robots look like this, but this is a good example of the kinds of things that's happening. Right, so it's on treads. It's got a bunch of sensors. It's got a bunch of cameras, an antenna, computer stuff, and it's got also weapon systems. Right, so it can fire bullets. So these things are commonly deployed with troops, but they're remote controlled. Right, there's a soldier who's trained to control this robot, has a little remote control device that they use to monitor its sensors, tell it where to go, what to do, who to fire at, when to fire. Right, there's a button for engaging with force, with deadly force, and the human has to press that. So these are not autonomous military robots. Right, these are teleoperated military robots designed to be controlled by a human. And that's the really big issue, is who has ultimate control in these circumstances? Is it a human in control, or is it the machine making the final decision? We talked a little bit last time about, I think I showed the picture of it. The Samsung SGR1 is this automated turret that can detect motion and then orient itself to fire at whatever it sees. And you can automate this, so you can just set it up and forget it, right, where it handles all this firing by itself, so that it's making the decisions about who to target and when to engage. Let me say that one more time just because it's really important. For these kinds of systems, for these Talon systems, there's a human being who's in final control, and this machine does not fire on anyone until that human gives the order. And then, of course, that human is also coordinated with all the other humans in the troop and their officers who are handing orders down from command. So these are not autonomous systems. These are not the killbots that people are worried about. But if you already have a system like that, it's not it's not a big leap to imagine this thing controlling itself. Not only moving around autonomously, locomoting autonomously, but also selecting targets and engaging of its own decision. And that's the thing that the Campaign Stop Kill Robots really wants to stop. Their big issue is keeping humans in the control loop, that there should always be a human making the final decision instead of a machine. Maybe I should just back up. So this is a sort of simple kind of autonomous weapon system where there's not a whole lot of intelligence. There's just object detection and tracking. But you can think of even simpler autonomous weapon systems that even don't do this basic kind of detection. So a lot of people talk about landmines as a kind of autonomous weapon system. So a landmine is just an explosive that you bury underground, and it gets triggered when someone walks over it. So landmines are autonomous in the sense that you don't have to have a human to tell it when to go off. It'll go off by itself when it decides to, right? When it gets triggered by someone walking over it. These landmines can be a problem because when the war's over, people don't go back through to dig up all the landmines that they buried. So these landmines can stay in fields for long periods of time, and then civilians, decades after the war is over, can walk along this field and end up getting blown up by landmines buried in the ground. Right? This is the problem when you take the human out of the control. Right? So it's not the human deciding when this thing explodes, but it's deciding for itself. That means that it can go off unexpectedly and when people don't want it. Right? So a landmine is a sort of simple example of an autonomous weapon system. But what people are really afraid of is these machines with artificial intelligence, where they can go around selecting targets, identifying targets. Yeah, so these cops have been in the United States they have been building cops for civilian. So this is the robot that they're suggesting, where this robot can move around, can go to hotspots, but it basically stays in the corner. It's got a bunch of sensors on it, so it can detect what's happening, and it can call in other troops as needed. You can arm these things, but you can also make them unarmed. And the question is, do you want these things around humans? Do you want them making the decisions about who lives and dies in these situations? It's worth emphasizing here that human police officers on their own don't always make the right decisions. But for the last few years, we've seen numerous cases of police officers abusing their authority and killing people who don't deserve it. Right? Eric Garner's one of these famous cases where this guy was not attacking anyone, and he ends up getting choked to death by a bunch of officers attacking him. And Eric Garner is just one of these cases. There's tons of these cases of people who are attacked by human police officers who do something wrong. Humans are obviously not infallible. They make mistakes all the time. So we're not expecting these machines to act perfectly. But the way the military reasons is that if we can get these machines to make better decisions than humans, in other words, if these machines can kill fewer people than a human being would, make less mistakes than a human being would, kill fewer innocent civilians, then that's progress, right? It's better to have the machine, even if the machine's killing some civilians, it's better to have that machine killing fewer civilians than a human being who would end up killing more. So the idea is that maybe, and a lot of people connected to the military-industrial complex think that building these robots is a way of saving lives. It's a way of protecting human soldiers. It'll make the future better. So the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots has been arguing to the UN especially for a while that these killbots are bad and that human beings need to be in control. And really importantly, last year in July, the FLI, the Future of Life Institute, which is it's a think tank devoted to considering cases of existential risk to humanity, right? So what are the big threats that humanity faces, right? So they talk about nuclear war, and they talk about climate change. But last year, they took on the project of autonomous weapon systems, and they released this open letter. I'll talk to you about the letter in a second. And they had a bunch of people in the field sign it, including a bunch of very well-known, very famous artificial intelligence and robotics researchers. If you know anything about AI, you'll recognize a lot of these names: Peter Norvig, Jeffrey Hinton, Stuart Russell, of course, Eric Horvitz. All of these people are well-known, well-respected AI and computer science researchers who deal a lot with AI. And then there are a whole bunch of other people, intellectuals and academics: Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, Max Tegmark, Dan Denick, Noam Chomsky, also signed this. Also, yeah, the well-known New Jersey Institute lecturer, Daniel Estrada, also signed this letter. So this is an open letter on AI, and their worry is about the threat that autonomous weapon systems poses. And I just want to read, I might actually read the whole letter here. Yeah, I'm going to start reading it. So autonomous weapons select and engage targets without human intervention. This might include, for instance, armed quadcopters that can search for and eliminate people, meeting certain predefined criteria, but it does not include cruise missiles or piloted drones in which humans make all the targeting decisions. AI intelligence technology, artificial intelligence technologies have reached a point where the deployment of such systems practically, if not legally feasible within a few years, if not decades, and the stakes are high. Autonomous weapon systems have been described as the third revolution in warfare after gunpowder and nuclear arms. Many arguments have been made for or against autonomous weapon systems. For example, that replacing human soldiers by machines is good for reducing casualties for the owner. We just talked about that. But bad by thereby lowering the threshold for going to battle. The key question is whether humanity today is ready to start a global arms race to prevent it from starting. If any major military power pushes ahead with AI weapons development, a global arms race is virtually inevitable, and the endpoint of this technological trajectory is obvious. Autonomous weapons will become the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow. Unlike nuclear weapon systems, they require no costly or hard-to-obtain raw materials, so they will become ubiquitous and cheap for all significant military powers to mass produce. It will only be a matter of time before they, until they appear on the black market and in the hands of terrorists, dictators wishing to better control their populace, warlords wishing to perpetrate ethnic cleansing, etc. Autonomous weapon systems are ideal for such tasks as assassination, destabilizing nations, subduing populations, and selectively killing particular ethnic groups. Therefore, we believe that a military arms race would not be beneficial to humanity. There are many ways in which AI can make battlefields safer for humans, especially civilians, without creating new tools for killing people. Just as most chemists and biologists have no interest in building chemical or biological weapons, most AI researchers have no interest in building AI weapons and do not want to tarnish their field by doing so, potentially creating major backlash against AI that curtails its future social benefits. Indeed, chemists and biologists have broadly supported international agreements that have successfully prohibited chemical and biological weapons, just as physicists supported treaties banning space-based nuclear weapons and blinding laser weapons. So in summary, we believe that AI has great potential to benefit humanity in many ways, and that the goal of the field should be to do so. Starting an AI military arms race is a bad idea and should be prevented by a ban on offensive autonomous weapon systems beyond meaningful human control. So the fear here is a fear in starting a new arms race. Arms race they liken to the race over gunpowder and nuclear arms, right? The comparison they make is to the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow. If you don't know Kalashnikovs, Kalashnikov is the rifle, the automatic rifle, the AK-47, Russian rifle that is used in lots of So it's a really cheap rifle, it's really easy to get, and lots of people use it for nefarious purposes. Right? It's not an expensive machine, in fact it's a very cheap machine, it's ubiquitous. And so you see terrorist organizations using this, but all sorts of militias and unsavory characters using these kinds of weapon systems. And this is their worry about artificial autonomous weapon systems, that they will become the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow because they're so easy to produce that everyone will get their hands on them. This is somewhat unlike nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are very dangerous, and there's been a big backlash against them, but they're also really expensive and really difficult to produce. And this is why we can put sanctions on Iran and monitor their nuclear weapons program from satellites, right? Because the resources and infrastructure required to build nuclear weapons, it requires lots of money, it requires lots of labs and infrastructure to do it, and you can see that stuff happening. But autonomous weapon systems you can build with off-the-shelf software or hardware that you buy at Best Buy, or I was going to say Radio Shack, but that doesn't exist anymore. And you can build really dramatic and offensive weapons that can do a whole lot of damage, and you can do it really cheaply, right? So right, so they're building these flamethrower drones, and it's really just to shock people. It's really just to show how dangerous these things can be. But all the stuff there you can buy pretty easily at the local hardware store. Right? None of the materials are difficult, and that means that people with nefarious purposes and whose pockets run deeper can get really devastating weapons relatively cheaply. Right? So this is unlike nuclear weapons and more like the Kalashnikovs. But either way, the worry is about an arms race, right? That if one side starts developing autonomous weapon systems, then in order to keep up, the other side is going to have to develop autonomous weapon systems also, and this just escalates into the point where our entire battlefields are automated with a bunch of killbots that are deciding on their own who to target. Notice, and this is really important, notice that this letter is not worried about robots taking over the world, or robots taking over humanity, or robots destroying humanity, anything like that. In this letter, the bad guys are still people using these machines improperly, irresponsibly. And we have a long history of human beings using their weapon systems irresponsibly. Right? Nuclear weapons are one example, chemical and biological weapons. It's very common for chemical and biological weapons to be banned by international treaties. Chemical weapons like mustard gas was used in World War I, and everyone saw how terrible it was, how much suffering the victims go through, how much of that was unnecessary suffering. And people have decided pretty unanimously that chemical weapons are beyond the pale, or just inhumane. War is hell, but there's some things that even we won't resort to. And most people have agreed that chemical weapons go too far. And that's why it's really important when someone uses chemical weapons, like Syria has been using chemical weapons in the war in Syria. The government has been using chemical weapons against its people. And it's a big outcry, right? It goes against all these sanctions, right? Everyone has agreed not to use these weapons. So when they are actually using these weapons, it invites a greater response, right? It invites even more outcry from everyone. Biological weapons also. Biological weapons are like spreading diseases, right? If you can build a bomb that has a really nasty form of, the flu or Ebola or whatever, and you ignite it over a city and make everyone catch it, right? Again, it's going to cause a lot of suffering, and the idea is that this is unnecessary suffering and humane suffering beyond the pale for war. And so chemists and biologists have historically worked to argue to ban such weapons, and have been successful in doing so. Right now, there are international treaties against the use of these weapons, and that when people violate these treaties, it's a big deal. And so the claim here is that from AI researchers is they want to do the same thing. They want to issue a ban against these weapons, not because we can't build them. Technologically, we know how to build them, but because it would be beyond the pale. It would be too terrible for human communities. The results would be too devastating. this isn't being afraid of AI. In fact, most of the people who are signing this letter are AI researchers and can see lots of benefits of AI and how it can help humanity more generally. And this is one of the serious reasons why they don't want AI to be used for weapons purposes, because it threatens to tarnish that whole enterprise. We see this today with nuclear energy. Right? So nuclear energy is relatively clean. It would be great to use as a transition onto entirely renewable energies sources, but people have this long-standing fear of nuclear power because of nuclear weapons. Right? The nuclear weapons have tarnished the whole industry, the whole nuclear industry. Makes it hard to use nuclear tools effectively, even if you're not weaponizing them. And so the AI researchers don't want that to happen to AI. They want people to still respect the importance that AI might have to these to our social situations without just associating it with weapons and destruction. Yeah, Bailey said in the chat thread that some parts of the world AK-47s can be purchased for as little as $10, and usually cost about $100. I mean that's right. They're super cheap. They're very devastating, and they're all over the place. And you can imagine the same thing happening with drones, being very cheap, being very devastating, and being ubiquitous. Yeah, so Bailey, did you have a question or a comment? Or did someone else?
Yes, it was me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's not the most terrifying drone I've seen so far. If you look up chainsaw drone.
Say that one more time.
If you look up chainsaw drone.
Oh, chainsaw drone, yeah.
That's also pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And the science fiction, recent science fiction, in fact, science fiction that was actually, I think, it used to be like a cop show with AI partners. One of the plot points was he used a drone to kill somebody. Yeah, it's very predictive.
Yeah. So here's the chainsaw. Here's the chainsaw drone. Again, they're doing a lot of this to show that you can do this, right? You can make a drone that has these kinds of capabilities. It's not at all my intention to scare you off of drones. There's lots of other commercial reasons for using drones. And I'll talk about those in just a second. Let me finish up with the AI, with the FLI letter. So FLI releases this letter. Asks a bunch of people to sign it. Lots of people do sign it, and this is part of what's fueling some of the backlash against these autonomous weapon systems. I'll just say that shortly after they released this letter, they got Elon Musk, among other people, to donate something like $10 million to the Future of Life Institute to research what threats these machines actually pose. So right now they're engaged in lots of research about how serious these threats actually are. Okay. What did I want to do? Oh, okay. So yeah. So this is just the autonomous weapons debate. Let me just flag really quickly. John Lawhead, and I last year decided to talk about the autonomous weapons when the FLI letter was released. Me and John. So that's me, and there's John. John's the climate scientist guy who was talking about geoengineering. Me and him talk about artificial weapon systems and the FLI letter. John is skeptical if the letters will do any good, but I try to defend it in this video. So you might find some interesting discussion here. I will also say that these autonomous weapon systems, where are we? These autonomous weapon systems are just one of the ways that robotics is becoming more influential in military engagements. So I also linked to this report for the DoD. This is a think tank report for the DoD about robots in the next few years. So this is a near-term report over the next 30 years, I think, is the report. what is the impact of robotics? How much is going to be automated? They talk about in this report how likely is it that other countries that we're enemies with will get access to this kind of technology. And the Department of Defense is pretty clear that automation is happening. It's happening rapidly, and lots of people are looking to automate their weapon systems in significant ways. And the Department of Defense wants to do so as well. Up until now, as far as I know, the U.S. has argued that that it also wants to keep human beings in the control loop, that it doesn't want robots to be making the decisions themselves. The U.S. military is a command and control style operation where you want to have complete control as much as possible. And the idea is that if you take control out of the human hands and put it in the robot's hands, then you've lost some of that control, at least in some situations. If the robot's firing in cases where you don't want it to fire, then it'd be better if the human being was in control. So up until now, the U.S. policy has been against autonomous robots because it assists their understanding of the strategy of the battlefield, that it's better to have humans in control. So so far, the U.S. has been on the side of this campaign to stop killer robots to keep humans in control loop. And again, that's the real key here at the end of the FLI letter, to ban autonomous weapon systems beyond meaningful human control. Not all autonomous, don't ban all autonomous weapon systems, just ban the ones that don't operate within clear guidelines of human control.
So, Professor.
Yeah.
I was talking about this topic in my other class, and as far as humans go in relation to controlling drones, we brought up the issue of almost like speciation of the drone commanders, because as technology becomes more advanced with things like virtual reality, you can essentially become the drone. You can immerse yourself in the drone's either, wings, which have analogs to your arms and legs and eyes. They correlate to the drone, so any reaction on your part has an action on the drone. And then we were talking about how that could have psychological and more generally like physical issues as a result of that. I'm just bringing this up to see your thoughts on it, how you would respond.
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about the extended mind thesis. You're talking about how we embody ourselves through our tools. That's right. We extend our sphere of action through our tools. We can do more things, and our bodies are extended beyond our skin with these tools. The common example are things like the blind person's cane. When a blind person is walking with a cane, they typically think of themselves as seeing what's in front of them, finding out what's in front of them. But in fact, it's the cane that's touching all the things. Right? So if they feel the curb in front of them, they would talk about it in terms of feeling the curb right in front of them. But in fact, it's the cane that's touching the curb, and they're just touching their cane. But they don't think that they're just touching their cane. They think they're touching the curb. And the reason is because we extend our sensory apparatus through our machines. If you're driving on a bumpy road, you tend to say things like, I can feel the potholes. Well, you're not actually feeling the potholes, you're feeling the car. But you take yourself to be extended through the car so that the car's behavior, so that you're sensing through the car's behavior. Yeah, go ahead.
Our speech assumes the epicenter of ourselves is what we're feeling, and we're feeling through our tools. Is that what you're trying to say, roughly?
Yeah, let me say it this way. So humans maintain a map of their own bodies, a map of how their bodies are oriented in space and what they can do. And we update this map as we get better feedback from our environment. One of the things that can change this feedback is our tools. So if we're using tools, we end up changing how our model of our behavior ends up working. Let me show you. This is what I want. So if you can see this image here, in the motor cortex of any primate, including you, there's a model of what you're capable of doing. And in these studies, in this particular study, what they did is they were scanning the brains of these monkeys to figure out what parts of their motor cortex were active. And it turns out that a naked monkey like this, the motor cortex is active and sensitive to things that are happening right around their hand. So if there's anything near their hand, their sort of sensory motor cortex is responsive to it. So if you put an object real close to their hand, if you put an object very far away from their hand, their sensory motor cortex isn't as responsive to it because it's really far away. But the thing is that you can change what counts as really close and really far away by giving the primate a tool. So if you give the monkey a tool, then what their sensory motor cortex recognizes as nearby or far away extends to the reach of the whole tool. Right? So it's not just what's nearby to their hand, it's what's nearby given that they can reach this further distance. All right, so the point here is that our understanding of what we can do in the world is modified by the tools that we have at our disposal. The more tools we have, the more that we can do in the world, the bigger our agency is. If we have a robot hooked up to ourselves in a way that you can have this fluid kind of exchange with the robot, so that it's, I'm thinking of like the Gundam style robots where you're doing karate moves inside the robot, and then the whole robot is also doing the same karate moves, which is I think the kind of thing you're talking about, Bailey.
Yeah.
In those cases, if you have a fluid connection with this technology, if you deeply integrate it into your habits, then you might actually move as if you're that extended creature.
When the 5'4" tiny girl walks around like a 12-meter mech.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So let me move on.
All right. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. So right now the U.S. does not use autonomous weapon systems. What we use instead are drones, and a lot of the resources that I want to get you into this discussion is on drones. So I have a NOVA documentary from 2013 on the rise of drones, but I also have this really great interactive website on drones. Let me just run you through some of the highlights of this drone website. Since 2004, an estimated 3,300 people have been killed in Pakistan by drones from the U.S., and less than 2% of those victims are high-profile targets. The rest are civilians, children, and alleged combatants. Alleged combatants who have never been proven to be guilty of anything in any court. Right? They have no right to a trial. This extends to U.S. Citizens. Right? So there have been cases of U.S. citizens who get involved with organizations that the U.S. thinks are terrorist organizations, and so initiates drone strikes that kill U.S. citizens without any due process, without any judicial oversight or stand trial to plead your case. Right? It's just bombed. This is unconstitutional, but these kinds of things haven't been challenged effectively in court. So this is depiction of all the drones that have been dropped over the last decade or so. A lot of drones, a lot of people killed. Very few of these people have been high-profile targets. 52 of these people have been high-profile targets. The majority have been civilians or other people we just don't know, including a lot of children. So one thing, before I get into the children being killed, one thing you'll notice here is that so remember Obama gets elected in 2008. Prior to 2008, this is all George Bush. George Bush did use drones, sometimes with great calamity, but he didn't use them a whole lot. He used drones a couple of times. Obama, on the other hand, has used drones as his primary means of military engagement. Obama doesn't like committing troops to anything. He likes using drone strikes, and he's used them a lot. Obama is the drone president, and this is one of his lasting legacies, is the repeated and consistent use of drone strikes. You see that the red numbers here are people that we know are civilians or children, people who are not targets or otherwise affiliated with any of our enemies. These are just normal people living their lives. We've killed a whole bunch of them as a result of these drone strikes. These drone strikes are more accurate than, like a nuclear bomb, but they're not entirely accurate, and we end up killing people that maybe shouldn't have been killed, including a bunch of children. So this is a George Bush incident, but in 2006, we accidentally bombed a madrasa. A madrasa is just a school. This was a school that was an active school being attended by a whole bunch of kids, and in this case, something like 70 kids died. This is the United States bombing a children's school because we think that they were terrorists, and a whole bunch of kids died. Oops. It's a bad thing, but we did a whole bunch more. Notice that in the next few drone strikes are also lots of civilian deaths. And in Obama's reign also, lots of civilian deaths. It looks like it gets a little more accurate as time goes on, but we're still killing a lot of people that we shouldn't be killing, people that don't deserve to die. If you remember just recently, we were caught bombing a hospital. The group Doctors Without Borders, MSF, was operating in a part of Afghanistan. We knew where the hospital was. In fact, we were well informed, and the hospital was clearly marked with a bunch of signs saying that it was a medical facility. And it's a huge breach of international law to target medical workers, to target hospitals. It's just not allowed by international law. But the United States nevertheless dropped a bunch of bombs. These weren't drone strikes, but these were just bombing missions. It's because we thought there was some high-profile target at the hospital. We don't know who they were after, but we do know that they killed a bunch of innocent civilians. And they also killed a bunch of doctors who were working to help the local population. So this interactive guide goes over more of the drone strikes recently in Pakistan and Afghanistan. This NOVA documentary is a little more sympathetic to drones, and it looks at a military perspective about how these systems are developing. The big drones that they talk about are the Predator drone. There's a Predator drone. Predator drone is unmanned. It's remote controlled, so there's a human being in base somewhere who controls the robot. But it's got a big payload, and it can drop weapons. It can also do surveillance. These things fly way up high, but the people on the ground can hear them coming. And in fact, this is what the war is characterized like. If you live in Afghanistan or Pakistan, the war is characterized by these drones literally droning in the air, where you can hear them coming. You can hear a drone coming, and then you know that there's going to be a bombing somewhere, and a bunch of people are going to die. And this has just been consistent for the last 12 years, where you're always living under the threat of these devastating drone attacks. So the NOVA documentary here is a little bit more sympathetic to the military and talks a lot to military officials who are looking to automate our weapon systems. And again, from the military perspective, automation of these weapon systems is better because it saves our civilians from a bunch of casualties, right? If every one of these drone strikes required putting U.S. troops on the ground, there would be a lot more engagements, and there would be a lot more human casualties, or U.S. casualties, a lot more casualties on our side. Probably more casualties on their side too. Right? Putting troops on the ground, putting boots on the ground is dangerous. Right? It's a lot safer to just strike them from a mile away in the air. And so from a military perspective, it looks like drones might be the more humane option. The problem with this is, and the FLI letter mentioned this, is that it lowers the threshold for going into battle. If putting troops on the ground means that these engagements are more deadly, more devastating to both U.S. and enemy soldiers, that means that we're probably going to do it less likely, right? If we didn't have these drones as an alternative, and the only alternative was to actually put troops in harm's way, then maybe we just don't do that mission, right? Maybe we don't do these missions because there's this danger of putting troops in harm's way. And maybe the drones take that danger away, which makes us more likely to engage in situations that we wouldn't have otherwise engaged in. In other words, you might think that even though the drones prevent U.S. casualties to some extent, they increase the amount of enemy casualties because we're more likely to engage the enemy because we have this tool. And in fact, this is the rule for military-industrial complex. The military likes its big toys, and it'll look for chances to use them. Right, so this is in class we watched the history of every nuclear explosion. There's this great video of every nuclear explosion since 1945. A lot of people know about the bombing in Nagasaki and Hiroshima during World War II when we bombed the Japanese. But most people don't know that the last 60 years or so has been just a relentless campaign of bombing until the end of the Cold War. Something like 2,000 bombs were dropped, 2,500 bombs were dropped. No, just 2,000 bombs. Mostly on ourselves, right? It's mostly the US bombing itself, the Russians bombing themselves. But this is another example of how when you build a bunch of toys for the military, they will play with them, right? We spent the last 60 years building lots and lots and lots of nuclear weapons, and we've been using them too. We've been setting them off and watching the explosions. Okay, so in the lecture, the other big thing I talk about is civilian drones and civilian AI autonomy.
Professor.
Yes.
What are we supposed to do with this information? This kind of sucks. Like all these things, like, frightening.
What are you supposed to do with the information? In what way? How do you mean?
When you think about it, it's, it's frightening.
Yeah.
The terror that happens, I guess, like what? I don't know. What do we do? Or what are we supposed to do with this information?
I don't know that you can do anything about it. You can learn it, pay attention, recognize that it's going on. I mean, a lot of people don't know the extent of our bombing operations in other countries and how it doesn't officially count as war. So no one really talks about it. But there's lots of information out on there. The Intercept recently published these drone papers. The drone papers that looks at Obama's basically assassination program, where he decides who lives and dies without any judicial process. He decides that certain people are big enough threats to be targeted, other people aren't, and then there's this whole procedure about when does someone meet that level of, meet that standard. And then these drone papers go over some of that decision-making process. I mean, it is really scary. It's really scary from a humanitarian perspective that there's this kind of persistent bombing campaign that we're responsible for, that's flying under our flag, right? That if you live in Afghanistan, you don't see that there's good Americans, there's bad Americans. What you see is that the Americans just bombed our school. It's really hard to think they're good Americans when you see the Americans bombing your schools. Right, so it's tragic for the people who are suffering most from this, but that doesn't mean it's great for everyone else. For the soldiers who are engaged in these drone wars, there's lots of discussion about this online. You can find lots of discussion about this, about how the drone pilots, in fact, aren't escaping the same kind of post-traumatic stress that you find from lots of other soldiers. It's incredibly common for soldiers, no matter what they're doing in the military, to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, dramatically more US soldiers die from suicide and depression than from actually being killed by the enemy, right? From post-traumatic stress disorder, from PTSD. And the drone pilots aren't immune from this. The drone pilots, if you actually look at what they do, they're basically just playing a big video game. They're on base surrounded by all this stuff, all the controls for piloting the drone and where it's going and what the mission is and so on. But this is all safe on base on the ground. And they're controlling the drone out in the sky that they're not actually in any danger at all from direct engagement. They are in danger from the stress of actually bombing people. Quickly. Yeah, this is what I wanted. Sorry for all those other pictures, but this might actually not be. No, this is in Pakistan. That's why I can find. This is Pakistan, not Afghanistan. But Pakistanis have taken to doing these kinds of things, where they print out giant pictures of the children that are being killed by these drone strikes. Right, right, this is that big image, and the idea is that you can see it from the sky. The drone pilot operators, when they hit their target, they call it a bug splat because it looks like a bug splat when you're flying way over the sky. And so Pakistanis have been putting these images on the ground so that to try to humanize the people that they're killing, or to try to make them remember that they're killing actual human beings. But even that psychological distance isn't enough. Drone pilots are quitting in record numbers because of the post-traumatic stress that they're experiencing as drone pilots. I mean, war is hell for everyone involved. So the actual people being bombed, it's terrible. The people who are doing the bombing, it's terrible. And for us back at home, right, civilians, our rights are being eroded away, right? So we're talking about U.S. citizens being killed by the government without any trial, right? That's an erosion of our constitutional rights. In general, the engagement in wars, engagement in wars is supposed to be a congressional act, a democratic act, but nowadays it's controlled entirely by Obama, making decisions that he doesn't have to explain to anyone else, using evidence that no one else gets to see, with an impact that none of us are even aware of, right, because no one talks about it. So it's scary for everyone, yes. I don't know if you can do anything. If you live in New York, you can vote today. That's maybe one thing you can do. All right, I'm almost out of time. I'm not going to have time to talk about robot rights. Actually, let me talk really briefly about robot rights.
Professor, did you tell us the sign-in sheet word?
Oh, the word of the day. Let's make the word of the day. Let's make the word of the day drone. Drone. If you put drone in on the sign-in sheet, you will get credit for the word of the day. Oh, so I'm not going to get a chance to talk about robot rights. If you want to talk about robot rights, come to live lecture this week, or maybe raise it next week when we're doing our online hangout. I'll talk about robot rights next time. What I'm going to talk about right now, just though, is civilian uses of automation. Right. So automation isn't just in this military context, but also in the civilian context. So Amazon and really all the big tech companies are looking for ways of using drones for all sorts of things. So Amazon wants to use drones to deliver goods. If they can use drones to deliver goods to people, then they can stop paying lots and lots of money to the post office to deliver goods for them. Right? Amazon is basically single-handedly propping up the post office. So if Amazon can find a way of reducing its costs by using drone delivery services, they'd like that. Google has drone delivery service in works. Google's also building these robotic cars that drive around. Yeah, Google wants a drone delivery service. But Google also has these robot cars. Oh, not Google Cardboard. Yeah, so Google is making these little cars, and these cars are going to be AI controlled, and they're supposed to be just like little people movers. So it's not supposed to be a car that you own, but it's supposed to be a car that can move people back and forth across an urban area where no one has to own the cars, where they can just call for the nearest car in their app, and the car can take them wherever they need. Without any drivers, it's like an individual, personalized bus service, personalized public transportation. So all these companies have interests in building these delivery systems, and self-driving cars are causing a lot of issues. The autonomy of self-driving cars is causing a lot of issues, and you've seen recently. In Tesla cars, this is one of the first autopilots that people have had lots of control over. If you have one of the Tesla systems, you can put it on autopilot and it'll control itself. And there's been lots of people on YouTube who have been doing this. And some of these people doing this on YouTube aren't doing it very smart. And the machine makes a mistake, like this machine is sort of swerving out into traffic. That's sort of making these mistakes. Yeah, that was a little swerve into traffic. So there's this worry about putting these machines on the road, whether they'll be safe. But there's a huge drive to put these autonomous machines on the road. People waste a lot of money and a lot of time driving on the road. It's a huge sink of resources, driving. If you can build autonomous driving systems, then they will be able to deal with traffic better. They will free up time so that you can do other things, so you can concentrate on other things. People really want autonomous driving systems to improve our transportation situation. But then this becomes an ethical problem, right? So what decisions should the cars make? There's a variation of the trolley experiment called the tunnel experiment. There's a tunnel problem for AI. Let me find it better. No, sorry. They have, here's a picture of a tunnel. Right, so the tunnel problem is the following. It's an AI problem, and it's kind of like the trolley problem. The tunnel problem works like this. So you're driving towards the tunnel. You're in an autonomous car driving towards the tunnel with a steep cliff on both sides of the tunnel, so you can't swerve one way or the other. As you're driving towards the tunnel, however, a kid runs in front of the tunnel, standing right in front of you. And you're about to hit it, and you're going too fast to stop. So your choices, in this case, when the kid runs out in front of you, your choices are to continue on straight and hit the kid, or to swerve to the side and fall off the side and maybe hit the side of the cliff. If you hit the kid, you're definitely going to kill the kid. You're going too fast for that to be safe. But if you swerve off the side, you're probably going to kill yourself. So the question is, which way do we want the robot to decide? Do we want the robot to hit the kid in front of it, or do we want the robot to swerve off to the side and kill its passenger? So it's not obvious how we should answer this question. I mean, you might think, well, what would the person do who's driving the car? The person who's driving the car, will they sacrifice their own life, or will they kill the kid? Maybe they'll kill the kid. What you see is when you do this survey, when you ask people, about 36% of the people think that the car should swerve and kill the passenger, where 64% of the people think the car should stay straight and kill the child. And the reasoning tends to be that that's what a person would do also. If a person were in the same situation, they would also continue driving straight and kill the child instead of sacrificing their own lives. And the argument is that, and maybe this is what the car should do also, people hit people all the time. Driving cars is dangerous, but the idea is that the car should default to protecting its passengers as opposed to protecting the pedestrians around it. So it sucks for the kid, but it's better for the machine to default to protecting its passengers. This is not at all a universal view. This is very controversial. Some people disagree with this. Some people think that the car should be decided the other way. And so there's an ongoing debate about these ethical challenges, about how we should build our machines, what decisions they should make, who should they preference in cases where they have to choose between two people. As we know from our own class studying the trolley problem, these answers aren't easy to resolve. Even in human cases, it's not easy for a human to make these decisions. I mean, now we're being expected to build robots to make these same decisions. So we have to think carefully about how to do this. I want to talk about robot ethics, about what we owe to robots and robot rights next time. It's something that matters a lot to me. So we'll talk about that next time, and then we'll talk about technological unemployment. Thanks everyone for showing up to the Hangout. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.